Let's get started with AWS Lambda. So I'll just type Lambda in there and you go to the console. Now I want you to understand that Lambda has maybe slight differences of UI across regions. So just to be safe, I'm going to use the North Virginia region, US East, and I encourage you to do the same. It's just that we are on par on the features and we are using the same kind of UI. So this is AWS Lambda, and as I said, it lets you run code without thinking about servers, hence the name serverless. So it's pretty cool because there's this really nice little tutorial in the bottom called how it works, and it just shows you very succinctly how things work. So let's just go through it. Basically, this is a function, and this is JavaScript. You don't need to know JavaScript to understand what the function does. You know, it's just pseudocode, but it says, okay, there's an event that happens, and then we're going to reply with a callback and say, hello world. So this basically just says hello world. If we run it, it says, hey, hello world. So things run, right? It's really great. So basically, your Lambda function executes code, and it replies to events. So the idea is that as events happen from these different sources that we talked about from before, basically like a mobile application or a little shot that goes into an S3 bucket, your Lambda function is going to reply hello world because that's the code that we just did from before. Obviously, you can do more interesting things, but you get the idea. And then the idea is that it's scaled seamlessly. So as your streaming analytics, for example, if you click on it, you send more stuff. As your streaming analytics sends data to Lambda, as you can see, the number of little cog wheels right here happening on the right hand side represents how many Lambda functions are executing. So if we send a lot of photos in our data processing, a lot of streaming analytics, we can see we're running 9 functions concurrently. And then when the load goes down, it goes back to only 1 function concurrently. Additionally, you see that from the cost, even if you have 4.5 million invocation, we're about $1 in. So think about how many invocation that represents for a business. That's really cheap. So that's the idea of AWS Lambda. And then it goes ahead and say, create a function. So we're going to create a function. And so if you're in North Virginia, you should see these 3 options. If you're in another region, you may see 2 options only. This is why I want to be in North Virginia. So we're going to not author from scratch. We're going to go straight from the blueprints. And the blueprints is basically pre-configured Lambda functions that we can use for our course and, you know, just for easy starters. But if you are doing a new project, we would start from author from scratch. And finally, serverless application repository is a whole repository of Lambda functions created by other people. We'll have a look at it in the later section. So for blueprints, let's just start and filter, and we're just going to type hello. And so we're just going to get a hello world. And for this, I'm going to get a hello world of Python 3. Now you're free to use the hello world of Node.js if you're more of a JavaScript person, or the hello world of Python 2.7. But I'll use Python 3. It's quite easy to read Python, and I think this will work for everyone. So I'll click on configure. And now we get to choosing a function name. So I'll just call it hello world because this is what our function does. Now, the first thing we have to see is that our Lambda function takes a role. And so a role is basically a function, an IAM role that will be attached to our function and define what it can and cannot do in our AWS infrastructure. So this looks just like the IAM role for EC2 instances. And this is the exact same principle. So we can either create a new role from one of our templates or create a custom role. I'll click on create a custom role and we are taken straight to the IAM console. And it says, okay, we're going to create a new IAM role called the Lambda Basic Execution role. And this sounds great. And if we view the policy documents, we can see that this is a very simple policy document. It's just going to allow creating log groups, creating log stream, and putting log events for AWS logs. So this basically allows our Lambda function to send logs to CloudWatch. And this is a very important aspect of it. Our Lambda functions will send log to CloudWatch, and so because they do, they need to have the proper IAM role to do so. So we'll just allow this, and now our Lambda function is basically going to use an existing role called the Lambda Basic Execution. Let's scroll down, and we can look at our function code. So this is very easy. This is code we cannot edit right now, but we have a function, Lambda handler, and it will just receive events, and it will print the value value 1 equals events key 1, value 2 equals events key 2, 3 equals events key 3, and so on. And then you will return just a first value echo key1. So a very simple function. It just will print a bunch of stuff to the log. Okay, we're ready. So we'll click on create function. And now the function hello world has been successfully created. So now we're able to change the code and configuration and so on. So let's do something fun first. Let's just go and click on test. Now when you click on test, you go to this configure test event. And so we're able to configure test events if we wanted to test our functions from the browser. And so I'll just call it simple event because we have to give event names. And this is just a small JSON document that represents what we're going to send to our Lambda function. So key 1 value 1, key 2 value 2, key 3 value 3. Very, very simple JSON documents. I'll click on create. And now we have the selected simple event from this dropdown, and we can click on test. Now clicking on test, it says execution result succeeded. Let's click on details, and we can see that our function took 0.38 millisecond. So this is quite short execution. So we were billed for 100 milliseconds. So this is the billing increment that we get. The resource configured was 128 megabyte of RAM, and we only used 21 megabyte of RAM. So that means that we have sized our resources correctly, and this is the minimum we can choose for RAM anyway. And then if we scroll down, we can see that we have the log output. And so we can see there is a start of the request ID, and we can see the log value 1 equals value 1, value 2 equals value 2, and this comes straight from the function code. And then we see this is the end of the request ID, and it gives us a nice little report in our log. And so straight from here, we can see our function has succeeded. And if we scroll down, we could see the code right here that made things happen. So this is kind of cool. If we go back up, we can click here to view the logs in CloudWatch Logs, because I think it gives a bit more concreteness to it. And so we can see we are in the log group AWS Lambda Hello World, and we have a log stream right here. And within that log stream, we see all the log values for our function. And so that's it just to get started with AWS Lambda. This was really, really simple, but just remember, we can test our function from the console, and we could, if we wanted to, edit the code right here. So if you wanted to, change this and maybe raise an exception and say something went wrong, because we want to see what happens when there's an exception, let's go save this function. On the top right, you click on save, and then you click on test to test it. Now we get an execution result failed. So this took 1.25 millisecond, and we had an exception, and here we're able to see the exception trace. So the cool thing is that in the log output, we can also see that the whole log for our function went here, and we're able to debug a little bit what's happening. So that's it for AWS Lambda. Just give it a go, try to edit this function. I'll just remove the comments right here to make it work again. But please try to change this a little bit, use your own programming language, give it a go, and then when you're ready, I will see you in the next lecture.